Alright, welcome back everybody to yet another video. This one's exciting. We're going to be diving straight into databases. We're going to be using Flask-SQLAlchemy, which is a toolkit for SQL for Python. It's a Python SQL toolkit and object relational mapper, which is, conventionally speaking, it's the go-to for Flask. There's a Flask extension called Flask-SQLAlchemy, which essentially uses SQLAlchemy. So that's what we're going to be doing today, and this is something that you're going to be using for almost any application that you're going to be making, because everything needs a database in order to do, in order to retain some records of dynamic data. So, for example, users. If you have users, if you have user messaging, that's going to be all stored in a database, and today we're going to be learning how to set that up. So let's start first and foremost by deleting all the session stuff and cleaning up our Flask web app. We don't need the logouts. We will basically redo things in a database fashion in the coming tutorials. So we're just going to get back to the default, just a working Flask web app. And let's do this as return render template index.html. I think that will do. We just get rid of this. Okay. Okay. So this looks good, and we have our index.html here, and we could just make this one an h1 that says it works. Okay. If you've been following until now from the previous tutorials, you already know how to open up this is how the file structure is looking, and vice versa. You already know these things, so I'm not really going over those. But today, what's new is we will need to first go to our terminal, and we will need to do this. We will need to source into the virtual environment first. So again, this is how we do it in Linux. If you're on Windows, previous tutorials will have you covered for that, hopefully. If not, Google has you covered. And now we do pip3 install, and we do Flask-SQLAlchemy, and this will get us the SQLAlchemy library installed in our virtual environment. So that's installing. And now, once this is done, we can clear this out, and we can basically just do. Okay, let me actually just run this really quickly. My first app.py. Just to see, okay, it does work. So before we integrate our Python app, we can just check out that this web app is running. It works as intended. Nothing weird going on so far. That looks pretty good. In fact, maybe I can put this. Oh, brilliant ideas, right? If we could put this like this. Maybe this is a terrible idea, but just so that we can see what's going on efficiently, I was thinking. And to have this one like this, but yeah, this was a terrible idea. I'm sorry, guys. It would have been better if I was to plan this ahead of time. But anyways, because we don't really need to see the HTML output so much, we're just going to be working mostly with the terminal and the database this time. So the terminal and the code this time. So anyways, I feel like this is a relatively better setup, hopefully. So let's just work with this. Okay, so we can close this, and we can run our Python app again in the future. But let's first do the changes that we need to do. So what's the first thing we do? Of course, we import from Flask SQLAlchemy, import SQLAlchemy, okay? And the capitalization and everything is important, so watch out for that. After we've initialized our app and we've done the config, we want to do a database equals. Conventionally, it's called database. You can call it whatever you want, really, but conventionally, people call it database SQLAlchemy, where we put our app object inside this, and this is done this way because it's Flask SQLAlchemy, so it's expecting a Flask app as its argument. Cool. That's basically all we have to do. Well, we will need to do one more thing. I'm just going to show you guys. If we were to run this, it's going to ask us for a SQLAlchemy database URI. So that's the one thing that we're going to need to add, and we do that over here in our app.config. So you're ever faced with this type of thing, but you're missing this or that, vice versa, because we're using Flask-SQLAlchemy, a lot of times you have to add it over here. So it's called SQLAlchemy database URI. And so basically we're going to be using SQLite, and I'm going to call our database db.SQLite3. SQLite3 is the file extension, this is the file name, and SQLite3, SQLite, is what we're going to be using as a database. Basically, it's a file. It's a database as a file. It's very easy to set up and comes built into Flask-SQLAlchemy. Flask-SQLAlchemy supports this out of the box when you install it. You don't need to do any additional configuration, run a server like you would for MySQL or other SQL, options that you have for your database. Other database options that you have. So for example, if you wanted, you could also do MySQL here, but you would have to do other configuration. You'd have to actually run a server for MySQL, vice versa. We don't necessarily need that. We just want a working database for now. And SQLite will get you through a lot of it in life. You won't need much more than SQLite for your personal projects, unless you're doing some heavy concurrency, or you're doing a lot of read-write operations at the same time or something. Then yeah, it might help to have something like, MySQL, Postgres, something like that. But basically, to keep it short, this is the one line that we will need now, and our database should be good to go. So let's go ahead and run this again. And you will see when we run this new instance folder is going to be added automatically for us, though it doesn't have anything inside it because we haven't done anything with our database yet. We've just initialized it and we haven't gotten an error. So at least this is good. We do have a DB. What's next? Well, we will now make tables. If you're familiar with how to make classes in Python, this will be pretty straightforward for you. So let's make a user class, for example, and let's inherit this thing called db.Model. Okay, so we're basically extending this db.Model thing. We're building on top of this. This will come with its own methods and vice versa. We'll see how that works in a second. A user, let's say it will have an ID, okay, and this is how we define columns in SQLAlchemy. We do db.column, and we will give it a integer or a string. So for example, db.integer, okay, and we will do primary key. Every single class that you give, every single model in your database needs a primary key, and if you know about SQL or databases in general, you will know that there's things such as primary keys. This is of course a concept that's foundational in relational databases. So we're going to make this primary key true because this is our primary key. It's every user will be identified by. By the way, I should really do this. Oh, that's so nice. Okay, ID equals db.column. Database integer, so we're defining ID as an integer, so it'll be user1, user2, user3, something like that. And in order for us not to have to deal with ID manually, we can add this auto increment equals true. And every time you add a user, it'll automatically determine the ID based on the previously last added user, basically. So it'll just add a +1 to that ID, to the last ID. So this looks pretty cool. Okay, what else would a user have? For example, I'll just say name. Normally you can do first name, last name. I'm just going to keep it simple. It'll have a name, and now we can add a database string, and in here we'll put how many characters we want it to be. For example, 255 is pretty conventional. Nobody's name generally exceeds 255 characters, so we can put that, and we can also say that safely everybody has a name, so we'll put this nullable false. This will make it so that every person has to have a name, right? That's nullable false. And what it's actually doing is it's actually later going to form automatically for you your create table statements with the constraints that you're doing over here. So you're just typing Python, but it's going to make SQL queries every time you want to do things here in Python. It's going to, when it's in relation to the database, going to automatically handle that stuff for you with simple Pythonic commands. So that's essentially what we're doing here. So a name, and let's put every person has to have an age as well. So again, another column in the database, it'll be a database integer, and let's make this by default everybody is 0 years old. Okay. Let's just do that so that every person, when they're made, if we don't specify their age, it'll show them as 0 years old. Okay, for fun. I mean, it does not really have to be anything that, just to show the use case of default. And we can also do other attributes, really. So we can also do something like username, for example, or email. Let's do email. It's probably better. Email. Let's just do database.column. Database string, again, 255. I don't think email addresses generally exceed that. So we can do 255, and we can do unique equals true. Okay, that's another thing that I wanted to show, which is that email addresses are generally, you want to make sure that you don't have a user that signs up from an email address and another user that signs up from an email address, because when people are signing in, that means that you're going to now get two users that come up for that email address. That's not a situation that you want. That's not something that anybody wants to deal with. That's not the way to do things. So that's why we can put this unique equals true if we want an email and a password. You know what? Let's add a password as well. Password equals database column. And for this tutorial, we're not going to be encrypting this or anything like that. Again, another 255 character. You could put this as 5,000 if you wanted. Conventionally, it's generally, it's generally not, when you're using SQLite anyways, I don't think it matters, because I think it just uses a text blob. But if you were using other databases, like, this is going to matter. You will want to limit things so that there's a higher upper limit of, I think, like 16,000-ish, or vice versa for some data. It varies from database to database, so that's when this stuff is more utilized. But for the moment being, I think you could just put it as 255 for most things. If you need like a really high number, you could even put like 1,000,000 in here, right? Or if you don't want to put it with the dashes, whatever. But this is just going to be retained as a text. For now, in SQLite, for the sake of this course and tutorial, and for the sake of making web applications for more personal use, you're not really going to need, to worry about this that much. So we'll just put 255 for now to keep it short. And the password must be, the nullable is going to be false for the password as well, because every person has to have a password. Okay, let's go ahead and save that. So when we saved it, our terminal ran again here, but nothing happens again inside our instance. Normally there's going to be a database file that's going to be made called db.SQLAlchemy, but it's not there yet because we need to run this one thing. So before running our app, we could do database.createAll, and this is the command. When you run it, as soon as you run it, it's going to create a database. Okay, but there is something that we need to handle, which is we're getting an error. It says working outside of application context. We need to add this command here with app.appContext, okay? And this is basically going to work inside of application context. When you're working within routes or vice versa, you don't necessarily need to worry about this because already within the context of the application that's running. But when you're over here, you will need to do this because otherwise this is kind of detached from the application itself, if that makes sense. So this is a higher level concept. Maybe we will talk about it in a future tutorial, but for the moment being, this is what you need to do with app.appContext, because our app is what we need in relation to this DB object right now. We want to run this in the context of the app. It's kind of self-explanatory, but it's kind of a higher level concept. So this is what we'll need to do. And when we save this and we run this again, we will see that our instance file is indeed, instance folder is indeed not empty anymore. It has a db.SQLite3 database file inside it, and you can see that that's how we wanted to do it. If we put something else here, that would be the name of the file, and if you put another extension, that would be the extension. Congratulations, we've now made a database, basically. How do we interact with this database? So this is how we make it, right? Let's add a user, for example. Okay, so every time that the application is going to be made, all right, we're going to add a new user. And the way we do this is we will first call this user, let's say we want to call this user Jack, okay? And Jack is a user, okay? Just like we would any Python class. Jack is a user. The ID we don't need to worry about because we already said auto increment, so we don't touch that. We put the name as Jack. We'll call him Jack Freeman. Okay, well, that's his name. Jack Freeman, and Jack Freeman's email address is jack.freeman@jackscoolsite.com. And his age is, let's make it 30 years old. And his password is Jack Freeman123. Terrible idea for a password, but there we go. We now have officially an object right now that's being referenced by this, that this Jack variable is holding this object that we just made, a user object. How do we add this to the database? We do db.Session.add, and we add whatever we want. So we're going to add the object itself right now, Jack, and all we need to do is database session commit. You make sure that you do all of this after your database is made. You'll only need to run database create all for when you're first running your application. We've already done that, so we don't actually need this anymore. We can comment it out if you want. But I'm just going to keep it because it doesn't hurt to have it. So as soon as we save this, as you can see, it restarted and it actually added a Jack Freeman. How do we know this? Let's go ahead and comment all of this out. And let's go ahead and do, now we're going to retrieve Jack, okay? Jack is in the database because we just added him. We know that he's in the database. It ran once, okay? When I saved it, it automatically reran our application, and it reran this one time. If I run it again, it's gonna probably give us an error because the username is not gonna be unique. So let's do that. Let's save. And it says, hey, look, man, integrity error. You told me that's supposed to be a unique, and you're trying to register another user with the same email address as before. So this is something that you know, generally speaking, when you're in the register page, you would do like, if there is a user with this email already, don't even get to this point. You would bypass this with an if condition until you get here. But for the purpose of just showing that, you know, it wouldn't let us do it again, I just ran that one more time. So we're gonna comment this out. We're gonna rerun our application really quickly, and it's gonna run as expected. Okay, and how do we get a hold of Jack now? So what do we need to do in order to find this Jack that we just added to the database? How do we get stuff from the database? Pretty easy. SQLAlchemy, you can do things with SQLAlchemy through this DB object, yes. However, Flask-SQLAlchemy has a more Pythonic way of doing things, which is, I think it's only Flask-SQLAlchemy that's providing this, which is if we do user dot query, now we can query objects, user objects. So in other words, rows from the database of the table user, you know, based on our needs. So we can do filter by, and we can say, for example, we know this guy's name is Jack Freeman. So we can do name is Jack Freeman, and we do dot first, okay? And we're gonna call this Jack, or yeah, okay. So we could call it anything. We could say it doesn't have to be the same thing. I just want to make that clear. But we're just gonna call it Jack for the sake of, you know, ease. And when we do print Jack now, okay, let's see what happens. It says user1. Why does it say user1? Because by default, we have a def __ repr for represent. And this, by default, is returning user1. If we wanted, we could make this return self.name, for example. Okay, so if we did that, you'll see it says Jack Freeman. Ah, very nice. We could also do the user plus, so it'll do the user Jack Freeman. Every time you print your database object, you know, because now it's an object, so you can technically think about it the same way you would make classes in Python. You know, we retrieved it and it has these attributes, and these attributes, as you edit them and you save to the database and vice versa, that's going to be in sync with the database. But otherwise, it kind of behaves very similar to because it is a class, so it behaves just as any other object within a part of a class would. Okay, so let's say we wanted to print Jack's email. We do jack.email. Let's refresh. And it says jack.freeman@jackscoolsite.com. How does this work? Let's see. What did we do? So we did jack equals user, so the name of the class, okay, dot query, okay. The reason that dot query, we didn't define necessarily a function or anything here. It comes from this db model. If we hadn't done this, this dot query wouldn't exist, right? Because we inherited this db.Model, we have this query method. It's a static method that we can now use in order to find database objects. So we do query, okay, user.query, all right. Filter by is a special, again, function method. Maybe this query was a, was a bad. I may have misspoke. A query would not be in this case a function or a method. Let's actually try this. If we were to do this, what will it say? Query object is not callable. Okay, so it's essentially it holds a bunch of these methods. One of them is filter by. So you can also do filter. You can also do other things. Okay, so the ones that are going to be relevant when you're starting with the database are filter by, because you can now filter by anything you want. So you want to find the person. Well, guess what? You can find them by whatever you know about him. The email equals blah, blah, blah. Okay. If there is nothing, it will return none. So for example, filter by, let's do something. Okay. Now when we print Jack, we'll actually run into an error because you can see it says filter by something. Oh, my bad. We'll do email equals something. We don't have such a Jack, right? So we don't run into an error. We simply don't have him. So we couldn't find him, so it's a none. If we hadn't had this repr here, it would have returned none in the console for us because oh wait, it's actually already done that. Okay, my bad. Yes, when we're representing, right? If it's found an object, then it's going to run this repr file. If it hasn't found an object, it's just straight up going to be none. So we're just printing none. So in the case that the user doesn't exist, when we do dot first, if there isn't a user that comes, then it's just going to be none. If there is a user, then the repr is going to be run for that user. So okay, everything looks good so far. What exactly is this dot first? Why don't we just do this? Like, what's the point of the dot first? The dot first exists because you could also do dot all. If there's a bunch of people that are age 30, okay, all the people you can get, everyone age 30 users. Okay, for some reason you want to query everybody who's at the age of 30. This is how you would do it, right? And now this returns a list of users. So for example, you could do for user in age 30 users. You can print their user dot name, for example. So this is valid code, for example. Let's try it out. Let's see how it goes. It should just print Jack Freeman, right? Because we printed their name. So this dot all, if we have multiple users, it's going to return them as a list. And in order to deal with a list, you need to make sure that you either iterate through it or you do something like this, like you get the index of it, or vice versa. So what we have is we have dot all, dot first, right? You can also do user query without filter by or anything, dot first. And it's just gonna get the first, user for you. So if we do this Jack and we print Jack here, because we know it's Jack, because there's only one user right now, it's gonna say the user Jack Freeman, because that's how we're representing that user when we're trying to print it out to the console using print. So cool. Does this cover everything? Not really, no. We still have deletion, we have updating, and vice versa. So let's go ahead and cover those in the next tutorial. For now, I think we'll leave it at that. In the future, we're going to obviously do all of these things inside of here. For now, we're just sticking to this because we'll take it step by step. And for now, we've at least added a database to our Python application. And in the future, we'll be building on top of that. We'll be using post forms and vice versa to be able to register, log in, and have some type of fully functional database and basically an MVC app, so web application. So stay tuned for that, and until then, take care, peace.